Thank you, Alan. Before going back to the panel, since most of you participated in the event yesterday, would you like to react to the comments, provocation that our panelists have just made? It's your turn. Okay, we have someone over there. Could you use yourself, please?
My goodness. Okay. Professor Linson from the IMNRC Newport Network. Two comments, if I may. The first one concerns, well, democracy. I often say that as long as the human being lives in a conceptual maze, democracy shall necessarily lead to division and conflict, certainly not peace. So when speaking of freedom of expression, reinventing democracy and the like, I think it is first important to see how the human being can get out of the conceptual maze. And unfortunately, the overwhelming majority live in a conceptual maze without realizing it. The other issue, or comment rather, is this one. I often make this comment. The issues we are faced with are not exclusively national or continental, but typical multicultural, integrated, interdisciplinary challenges that can only be appropriately managed through new global governance, that is coordinated, holistic, interactive, bottom-up, top-down, integrated, interdisciplinary governance, that in turn requires integrated, interdisciplinary education. So there is indeed the need to go beyond a European CAPS to a worldwide CAPS. Thank you.
Thank you. Over there.
Hello, my name is Frank Kresin, and I'm a research director at an organization called Waag Society. One of the comments was about money, and there's not more money needed, and I agree to that. But I think it should be differently distributed. There's a lot of money going into the systems that actually we want to change. And it's by subsidizing those incumbents that a lot of the different bottom-up strategies are prevented from taking on. So if you could take some of that money and turn it to these very much needed practice-based experiments that should not so much give new products, but should give way to new dialogues and new ways of doing things, or new processes. And we should not expect quick wins there, but we should heavily invest in that. I think we could get more done.
A friendly suggestion, when we are here, never ask for less money, because given where we waste our European funding for funny trips to old-fashioned places, let's ask for more funding and then we'll find a way to invest it properly. Next.
Thank you. Harun Saad from Local Urban European Development Network. I just want to pick up on this theme of democracy because I think it's fundamental underlying it. I think we are living in a period of time where there's certain myths around. One is the myth that we're in a crisis. I don't believe we're in a crisis. I actually think we're in a major transition and there's a disconnect. I mean, we're talking about Europe. I mean, look at what comes out of the European elections just recently. A huge disconnect between European citizens and the institutions here, reflected very much in anti-establishment voting that took place. No one can deny that. And yet here in Brussels, business carries on as usual. This is a play-to-play democracy here in Brussels. It's a corporate democracy we have here in Brussels. It's dominated by corporate interests. How are we going to actually address the challenges that you are sort of posing to us unless we begin to actually, if you like, challenge some of the kind of institutional biases that are actually present in our mainstream political systems? I mean, if you look at urban social movements are really, really thriving right now. I mean, all across Europe. I'm more familiar with the European situation than I am with the American situation. But I mean, the European situation, urban social movements are thriving. These are essentially political movements. These are movements that reflect the values and principles underlying what we're talking about here today. But these movements are not in any way, they are political, but they're not in any way politically connected to institutional structures. They see those institutional structures as irrelevant. They see them as barriers to actually the goals and values they espouse. So one of the key things, I think, is how do we and how can we, through this kind of development, challenge mainstream political structures?
it's fair to, thank you, Sad. It's fair to say that one of the projects funded by CAPS, this Descent, if I'm not wrong, Francesca Bria, if she is here, where?
Descent, yeah.
Descent. So,
Decentralized Citizens Engagement Technologies.
you see, it's funding those kind of movements. Have a chat with Francesca, and that's really peculiar that the European Union is funding those disruptive forces. There was another comment over there, yeah.
Yes, Indy Johar talked about systemic change, and we talked about how are we going to prevent, let's say, the forces that are putting us in these bad positions. So how is CAPS going to fund projects that are going to ensure that we're not going to produce more of the same? And to make sure that the systemic change goes in a, let's say, beneficial direction for all of what we have been talking during those 2 days.
Yes, thank you for all the comments, and I would ask the panel to respond and they find appropriate, and also to reflect, to connect to the last point, about if the next step, what we could call a distributed architecture for Europe, because we don't want a just nice little disconnected project, but we want to build the institutional infrastructure to transform Europe and benefit clearly the rest of the world. Wants to shoot?
Thank you. So I would agree with a lot of the comments. I mean, one of the few things I would say is to build this sort of economy and this sort of discourse will take time. So yes, you can't throw €1 billion at it and it will absorb it. But what I'm trying to say is it will, I mean, if you look at the social impact or the impact economy, it took 10 to 15 years to grow to the point where Big Society Capital Bank was born. It requires institutional infrastructure, which requires legal forms, which requires all capability building, markets, movements, all this to be grown. But it was a strategic decision taken to grow that social economy. Simultaneously, I think what civic technologies and the civic organization infrastructure that we're talking about requires that scale of play. It requires a strategic, long-term interest in that model. I do think it's important. I also agree with the point that actually this form of technologies, they will become political. In a way, they build the infrastructure for a new politics. They build the infrastructure for new distributive. Democracy is not only the vote. Democracy is also the means of production. Many of what we've been seeing is actually the democratization of production, whether it's production of knowledge, physical infrastructure, or other things. So what we're seeing is technology creating that infrastructure. And I think investment in that is going to be very powerful to maintain the deep democracy of Europe. So I think this is a systemic thing. The corporate vested interest, I hear you, but in a way the things that are organizing this stuff have as you're finding, there's a huge groundswell of this culture and this behavior. And the groundswell will take its own speed. The question is, will our institutions transform quickly enough and appropriate enough to be able to accommodate that? That's a choice. Other countries have failed to adopt to that, and we've seen certain circumstances. So I think that institutional transformation is going to happen.
Thank you, Indy. Alan, Lorenzo?
Yeah, I think I agree, that resonated with me. That resonated with me. I think that there's a couple of different levels to respond on. As far as the discussion of democracy, the threat of democracy, I think that I am more bullish about a rise of a new type of corporation that is better structured to meet the demands of our current ethics and political aspirations than I am about a decoupling of politics from corporation. I think in the United States, the example that sort of was revelatory was a legal battle over a bill called SOPA-PIPA, which was a privacy and copyright protection legal battle. It was essentially classic American corporate democracy at work. It was a bill sponsored by the entertainment industry. But what we had was a new set of actors in the space that were also large and influential. Wikipedia being the first actor to move, but then followed by Craigslist and sort of the social enterprise sector of the internet economy, and then followed by other large institutions. And it was that counterweight that of both funding and political power that was able to defeat the bill so resoundingly. And so focusing on building those partners in the private sector that do have the values that you want to be shared, I think is an important part. And the other point that I wanted to make was regarding, well, actually, the other point that I was going to make has escaped me for the moment. I'll let you go and I'll chime back in if it comes back to me.
Lorenzo, then you might make the final remarks. Have you?
So, okay. I also agree with the comments and also about money, even if Filippo say that we don't have asked much, but I think that the right way to go is creating new partnership, private and public partnership, as you say, in order to draw resources from the private sector to the public sector, because most of the resources in the world are private, and some of them can be really invested if we build new metrics, as we say in the previous panel, impact metrics, in order to show how investment on social innovation can improve the general level of the economy. That's a great challenge. The other challenge is, yesterday I was presenting the platform I'm developing in Italy, in 5 cities of Italy, and some people ask me how we can translate it in other languages, because we have all the same problem. This is a platform to discuss about waste management and public management of public goods in general, and we were surprised at how difficult it is to translate even for the language. I think that the main challenge can be try to create a community in each different state of Europe and a common platform for debating, because we need to debate on the same thing, French, Spanish, Italian, unless we are not able to talk the same language and understand that we have the same problem, we can build a real union, even bypassing the national state. That's the real challenge we have to face. Not more national state, but transversal community that through the technology can understand how similar they are and how can cooperate to build a common future. It's challenges because we have from one way to innovate, to democratize innovation, everyone can be a policymaker, and from the other way we have to innovate democracy.
Just one last point that I forgot. A very important point, and it's a very simple point and very tactical point, is that open source is a model that works. It is an effective, proven model for building tremendously valuable assets that can be shared by everybody, that can be contributed to and informed by an inclusive set of people. And I think that any future that we have that achieves the sort of vision that is being described is going to be at least very informed by open source software.
Thank you, everybody. I hope the session was useful to think about how we can put the wings. And actually, I would say, you gave us a car, now we want a Ferrari to take over Europe and transform it. Thank you very much. Coffee break.